Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of Cannot Register Twitch name. But anyway, our real name is Discussion, and we do news summary in Southeast Asia and in the world. So here comes another edition. But besides that, today we're also going to do a quick discussion on Sudan situation. What's going on there? So we researched quite thoroughly about this, and we also going to do a few case studies about the successful examples of democratic transition to democratic process. What are the main factors? So if we have time, of course. Yeah, and as always, we have me first and Joshua, and yeah, let's get started. So I think this week, uh, obviously we have to talk about South China Sea, and this week Philippines visited the president of Philippines, Marcos. He went
Oh,
to the
Chesney.
U.S. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so he went to the US. It was a 4 day trip, and mostly it's about maintaining relationships, but also it's also about getting the new guideline on strengthening that military cooperation. And we will go into the details. Yeah, you can see the photos here. This is an old photo from 2022.
Wait, for some reason, it's okay.
Mhm.
Just loaded. Yeah, screen
Ah,
share.
you got it. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, this is I got it from the guy's Facebook, by the way. Not copyrighted. I've been trying to avoid that. So they had a talk, and this is like one of the first major visit, and it's also hosted by the White House to a Philippine leader in 10 years, like the largest one of the largest ones. And obviously, they do that normal diplomatic talk, blah, all those wonderful things. But the main key point is that now there's going to be an expected increase of new rules of better military cooperation and increased business cooperation, but most likely military cooperation. And the Pentagon actually released shit like a fact sheet between the U.S. Philippine defense cooperation rules, I think last Wednesday, and it lays out groundwork for mutual planning. It's essentially lays out the legality of it and the operation of it. Obviously, for most of us, it doesn't really affect us, but in the grand scheme of things, it's more like okay, there's a guideline now. If any country kind of invades the or incites issues in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, in the agreement, they actually don't name China specifically, but obviously it's China, and they also do things like real time sharing of information. So we're gonna see how that's gonna be executed because now military is gonna share information about this, and yeah, what do you think, Joshua?
I think it's necessary. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because the only one who can stand up to China is the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
realistically.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about like how they want to do it because nobody wants a all-out war, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if you just give a brief backstory for the viewers who are not super familiar, there's disputed territory. The South China Sea is disputed territory between China and basically almost the rest of the Asian countries, at least half of them. Specifically, the Philippines. In 2016, it was actually very interesting. So in 2016, the Philippines won a UN-backed hearing that ruled that parts of the disputed South China Sea belong to the Philippines. But interestingly, because China is part of the UN,
Mm-hmm.
but China has rejected this ruling.
Oh
So it says,
yeah.
nope, I don't agree to it.
Yeah, and it's I always thought it was kind of funny every time I read that because it's like, oh, you just reject and nothing happens. Like there's no further discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like,
So it
oh,
kind of
okay.
shows how fragile this UN idea is. Like, can they
Mm,
really enforce anything on the big boys?
yeah,
The
exactly. I
Philippines
mean,
is, yeah.
yeah, I mean they have. Do they have their military? Is the little group
What
the
really?
UN peacekeepers? I think that's what it's
I'm not
called.
sure if that's a mid. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but I don't know how effective that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's currently quite interesting because the ASEAN countries have tried to come together to make an agreement.
Hmm.
But China has the South China Sea issues affect five of them. There's
Hmm.
10 countries in ASEAN. 5 of them are affected by the South China Sea issues with China, and 5 of them aren't. So there's no united front because the
Yeah,
5 that aren't do not want to piss off China in any way.
yeah.
So they're like, so there's no consensus because 5v5.
Yeah, exactly.
But the worry for the Philippines as well is that China has started militarizing the South China Sea. So
Mm-mm.
they've been building a lot of artificial land, artificial islands.
Yeah.
So, like, I do think with the current climate and the way China's doing it, it's unlikely that there's going to be a peaceful resolution.
Mm-mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just
yeah,
a matter of when, right?
yeah. But
Yeah,
I
because
also, honestly, I get what China's doing.
mm,
I understand because they are basically the big boy and they are going to dictate what goes, what they're okay with, what they're not okay, you know,
mm,
because everybody needs them. So they need them. I would think each individual country, ASEAN country, needs China more than China needs that country. So it's hard. Yeah. Like
true.
even Marcos was saying that um, China is one of Philippines' biggest trade partners. So the dispute,
Ironically, and
yeah, the dispute over South China Sea. Let's keep it separate from our trade relations.
yeah,
It's a separate
yeah.
issue altogether. And
I
China's like, "Mm-mm."
sure. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the fluidity of the diplomatic tactics. Yeah.
Mm, yeah,
And just to add on that, like Biden is also going to Japan and Australia next month to discuss the South China Sea tensions, of course, and the Russia-Ukraine war for whatever. Yeah, and I think we did mention in our newsletter that it seems like US is doing faster work than China, like in building up the alliances. But it could also be the media biases that the sources of news that we use as well. Like we don't really know much or have much visibility in what China's doing diplomatically. Yeah.
yeah. Within ASEAN, I think so. Again, there's 5 of them have no problems with the South China Sea issue, and I think China's making a lot of good inroads with those countries because,
Mm,
like, the US is a good ally, but I think China is closer, and
mm,
also the one difference is that China's willing to assert its authority and they kind of mess your economy up. They're
mm.
willing to punish you. The
Yeah,
US, like, if you don't piss them off, like if you don't side with them, they won't try to ruin you.
yeah,
But
yeah.
China seems to,
S- Small gangster.
yeah, it's more
Yeah,
gangster.
a
I
small
agree.
gangster.
I
Yes.
agree.
Like
Yeah,
oh, you say no and suddenly your
yeah,
house is burned or some shit. It's
yeah.
kind of like
No, no
that.
equals enemy. If you're
Yeah,
not my friend,
yeah,
you're my enemy. There's
yeah,
no.
yeah. And it's like something is so petty, like banning. I think some exports from Taiwan's like fruits.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
but yeah. To you it seems petty, but to them it's because
Oh.
China's the big boy, right? And they are the
Mm,
ones who dictate the terms. So
yeah.
that's
It's
the reality of the situation.
yeah. I
So
mean, banning exports of that would probably like bankrupt some firms in that
exactly,
industry. Yeah.
exactly,
Mm.
yeah, exactly.
True, true. Yeah.
Because I think it's a lot of bullshit. I mean, like not bullshit, but basically the media is biased against China because
Mm,
when the US became a superpower, they also did a lot of underhanded shit like this. But of
mm,
course, this is not reported, right?
yeah.
Because Western media wants to paint China as the bad guy.
Mm, yeah.
They're just asserting their authority.
Yeah.
So,
That's actually a very interesting point. On a side note, right? I was talking to, obviously, I can't name her. So, a founder of a news company in Thailand. And then she was saying, like, she used to work at this news company. And then when, Thailand, they had this political party, like the Shinawatra family, which owns like a major conglomerate in the country. And then when the guy became the prime minister of Thailand, this news organization criticized him so much, wrote a lot of pieces, just went like above and beyond. So the guy's company, even though it's supposed to be separated, pull out all the ads. And back then the ads were big. Even now it's still big in Thailand in terms of how newspapers or televisions make money. Imagine like hundreds of millions became zero in that year. So like all the ad sponsorship just boom. It was really interesting in like how And I always wonder after I heard that story, like, is that still like kind of in play in the US? Like, if you've like in terms of sponsorship and stuff, and as much as the news and media company is shifting to subscription, a huge chunk of revenue still comes from like sponsor deals, sponsor
Mm.
ads, and all of that. Yeah, so like it kind of links to what you said about the Western media as well.
Yeah, of course, of
Mm-hmm.
course. Yeah, agree.
Moving on to a darker story. This one is on the serial killer in Thailand. I think I have the image. Yes. Uh, this is quite fascinating. We like for our purposes, like in terms of our newsletter, we generally don't really cover serial killing accidents unless it's like massive. And this story is kind of grasped my attention and the nation's attention even. This is probably one of the worst serial killings in Thailand in recent history because the number has now reached 14. And this woman, Sararat, she essentially accused and already charged of using poisoning through cyanide. And it was assumed that she like slipped cyanide into the foods or the drinks or offered them as like a medicinal, like herbal medicine to the victims. And the reasons that she killed these people was simply because of money. Like she owes a lot of money, she borrowed money, and then there was a lot of incidents where before these victims died, they transferred a lot of money to her, and then they just died. Yeah, and investigation is ongoing. Obviously, that's I think the reason that she was called was because I think one of the victims survived, didn't die from the poisoning. There was a lot of suspicion about how people around her kept dying and how she kept hanging out with rich people. Yeah, so all of that kind of led her to being arrested and all of that. And her husband is the high ranking, shit, former husband. Yeah, I need to rewrite that. Anyway, being charged with fraud and embezzlement. And she was also diagnosed with mental issues, but they say that the mental issue is not severe enough that she would be doing something and doesn't remember it. So yeah,
Mm.
this is quite 14 people by it. And just to give you context, like does 14 people seems like a lot? I'll show you. I actually had if anyone see Jeffrey Dahmer on Netflix, which came out I think last month. Um Jeffrey Dahmer will kill a lot of I think gay people in the US back in the I can't remember the year. He only
Mhm.
killed about 17 people, and he was already considered one of the worst. Obviously, we can't compare to some of the higher killers like the Colombian ones, the Mexican one. These one are in the hundreds, but still, killers you can count them when they kill about more than three people with specific methods. So yeah, yeah. What do you think so far, man?
No, I get your point about
Hmm.
like the number of killings is actually quite significant. But I think
Hmm.
in first world economies, it's harder to murder more people. That's also the
Hmm.
thing. In
Hmm.
like in developing economies, it's probably easier to get away with it because of
Yeah, yeah.
corruption, because of like maybe the police force isn't as well funded, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
True, true. And
Like
yeah,
if
you
you
can
look at
see.
it, the guys with the most killings,
Yeah,
they're all from countries which,
yeah. Just fucking go rogue,
yeah,
go nuts. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, man. Where's the highest US guy? I'm curious. It's
yeah.
probably like
US guy.
ages ago as well. That is upper
Uh,
probably. Yeah, but was it
1970.
a while back? Oh, it's recent.
It's quite recent. Wow, shit.
Wow. Jeez.
God damn. Did he out? It's like a sign of I'm now curious.
Oh yeah.
Oh, he's murdering women. Okay. Anyway, the interesting point another is how serial killers generally kill people. Um, and yeah, initially I thought killing for financial gain is not common, but actually financial gains actually makes up like almost one third.
Mm.
Yeah, so because when we think of serial killers, we think, oh, they're just psychologically fucked up, so they just kill because of some kinks or some fetishes, or just kill because of pleasure and all of that. Yeah, so it's actually financial gain actually makes it also plays a huge role,
Yeah.
and a lot of weapons are done through guns, obviously. Um, and poisoning actually doesn't make up a lot. It's only 7%. So just fun fact, I suppose. and now the investigation is still ongoing about this. So they're
Mm.
trying to see like how did she get the cyanide,
Yeah, that's
and
what I'm curious about too. I'm
yeah,
like,
their
how did
assumption
she?
is that she probably got it from her sister who has a pharmacy. Um, but the investigation is once again still ongoing.
Mm.
Yeah, but it was yeah, it's just weird. I I just didn't expect like killers in 2023 because she started killing quite recently, like 2020.
2020.
Yeah,
Yeah.
during COVID, and it's in the west of Thailand. Uh, yeah, and then the victims you can see the age around that. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, now I'm scared, man. Like people will
Yeah.
offer you like herbal medicine. So initially, like just a finishing thought, like so she kind of befriended them and then talked with them and hung out with them, and that's why they like she managed to offer the medicine
Mm.
eventually. Yeah.
Yeah, because culturally, I'm assuming it's quite trusting, like in this sort of
Mm-hmm.
Thailand, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like if somebody you consider a friend offers you herbal medicine, like you'll be like,
yeah.
yeah, all
Sure,
right, I'll
why
take
not?
some.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, for people from Western countries, like you may find or that someone offer you herbal medicine, but think of it as alternative medicine, like the acupuncture or a lot of alternative medicine, I guess, in San Francisco or in
Mm.
the that side of the coast is more common.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
It's
it's
the
like out.
idea of using like herbs and
Yeah,
various
exactly.
like other things to heal you, so you let it like
Mm,
naturally heal rather than
yeah, exactly.
yeah, using Western pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. Moving on. Now, the other news, which is gonna be quite short, but I thought it's interesting. So Cambodia, right? After 40 years in power, Prime Minister Hun Sen he's gonna hand over the reins to his oldest son. So initially he was gonna like give the power, I think 2028, but now with his I guess declining health, he decided to speed things up to hand it over to his son. And for people who don't know, Hun Sen's been kind of strict with his rule. Essentially, it's almost it's a dictatorship. Even though there's a party, but then when his son quit his job, or he quit his job and making way into the election is virtually guaranteed that he will win unless something weird happens. Yeah, so that's another another deduction on democracy in Southeast
Something
Asia.
interesting is
Hmm.
there seems to be a trend where when dictators come into power, but they were Western educated.
Ah, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
and
seems. Yeah. Wait, I'll let you continue.
sorry. Um, I always think like the schools in the US and UK because he went to pretty good schools. Like like do they just like oh fuck it we'll just accept him? Like it's
Oh,
such
that wasn't where I was going, but yeah,
God.
they went fuck it. Yeah, I'll just accept him.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing. Like we're gonna have a dictatorship son, but why the fuck not?
Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
he's got money, he's getting
yeah, it's got
paid.
yeah. I think he went to West Point and then New York University, Bristol. The yeah, it's yeah, it's just kind of weird, but
Yeah.
yeah,
So what I was getting at is
yeah.
what's been noticed as a trend of sorts where dictators who send their kids to be Western educated, when the
Mm.
kids take over, they tend to lead to some more democratic society.
Ah, right, right.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting trend because dictators send their kids overseas because it's safer for them. Number one, and
Mm,
potentially, I'm not sure about this, but maybe the education is just higher quality, and they want
mm,
that for their kids.
mm.
Yeah. So like even Xi, President Xi in China, he sent
Oh yeah, yeah.
his daughter overseas to study.
Oh,
Yeah, I think
oh, I didn't know.
U.S. or no, maybe not U.S. I don't know where, but
Yeah,
yeah, not in China. But I think that might be a safety thing.
yeah, I see, I
Yeah,
see.
I would assume because he doesn't want his kids in the line of fire, right?
Mm, yeah. And then you brought up an interesting point, right? I wonder, like in 10, 20 years from now, if like these kids ever take power, like, would it actually lead to democracy? Obviously, they would be more malleable and accepting of
Mm,
democratic values and
yeah,
all the discussions and all of that. Yeah, I think I'm really keen to. Yeah, it's just another
yeah.
thing
No,
to
it's
look
gonna be
forward
interesting
to.
because if they
Yeah,
were U.S. UK educated, then perhaps he might because this guy, right, the son, he was
yeah.
U.S. UK educated. Maybe
Yeah.
he'll be more like keen to listen to the US.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh no, that's gonna
exactly.
be interesting. Yeah, I like that.
Uh, mm. Anyway, moving on, folks. Oh yeah, by the way, we have a new king today. I think King Charles the
Oh,
Third.
King Charles, yeah,
Yeah,
coronation.
I, not a big deal to me, but Thai King went to the ceremony.
Oh, he got an invite. I didn't get an
Uh,
invite. That's very unfortunate.
uh,
I was waiting
he,
for the invite, but no.
uh, uh, now we go into. Do we have time? We do. This one is more on the business side, which we also don't cover a lot, but I think it's a fascinating trend where co-living is the alternative way of living in Singapore because of the rental spike. And for people who are not familiar, co-living is essentially having a roommate, but co-living in Singapore is well more organized. It's still very expensive as well. It's not cheap. And the way it works is that you kind of live in a fancy. I'll show you the pictures. I think might as well, so that you can get the idea. It's not like living in a with roommate in a shitty looking condo. It looks quite nice. The room looks kind of like this. They're trying to make it luxurious with like nice common rooms and all of that. Obviously, your room will be quite small, but you have the benefit of hanging out with other people. And it's now become so popular that you can see that the rental rates, I think occupancy rate, sorry, is about 95% full because more people keep looking for them and it's cheaper, even though there's less privacy. I actually have a few expat friends who are like late 20s and early 30s, and they're all just living in co-living. And it's because, partially because they're lonely, but also because they just like to hang out afterward. And some even make a business out of it, as in I read some cases of and interviews like where a guy just had a normal job, day to day job in Singapore. He took a few real estate courses and then he quit his job. Not quit his job. He like bought properties and then segmented into co living space, which is legal by the way, but you need to check the legality of it, of how many rooms you can do, what type of stuff you have to do. So he did all that, and then now he quit his full time job and then just do this co living stuff full time because it just went so well. Yeah. Yeah. Any
Yeah,
thoughts for you living in Singapore?
I mean, I found that's interesting because well, what I'm thinking is even before these co-living spaces came out, a lot of people in
Hmm.
Singapore would just rent a room in HDB.
Hmm.
And I was trying to figure out like what's the difference between these co-living spaces and just renting a room in a HDB. And like the way I look at it, the main difference is just first thing first, it comes fully furnished
Yeah.
and it's like shorter rental periods. So like for example,
Hmm.
3 months versus like 11 to 12 kind of rental period.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other one is it's sort of reminded me of a university dorm
Ah.
in the sense that
Yeah.
they try to foster like a sense of community. You know, like they'll
Hmm.
have community events and crap. Whereas if
Yeah.
you
Yeah. They
stay in
do.
if you rent a room in HDB, none of that's gonna happen, right?
Hmm.
Your landlord's not gonna be like,
Hello. Welcome home.
yeah, hello.
uh,
Yeah, so that's also quite interesting. But yeah, I think the main difference is just that, and the fact that I suppose there's no landlord specifically. You know, like a landlord. So like the living situation, like
hmm.
how if pets are allowed or not, it kind of all depends on your roommates. Like if
Hmm.
you guys, because you guys make the rules together, right?
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think that's kind of one of the advantages.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. True. True. Yeah. Although personally, I hate roommates, man. Oh, in uni, I obviously right? I rented an apartment, a room outside of the uni, and then my roommates, they were both nice, but I hated them. No explanation like needed. I just didn't like to share. Like he was just nice, like saying hello, how are you? He was cooking, and I just said to him in my head, like fuck you, fuck off, and I just walked to my like oh yeah, I just didn't like him, even though he was nice. I just like privacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like I'm a real jackass, but I get the idea of like coming home and just be completely yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I get that.
but with like co-living, when you like kind of walls out of the room, you still have to like act socially acceptable.
How does that
Right?
work if you're living with your girlfriend?
I mean, I can walk naked now. It's been 7, 8 years, but I'm at the point of full comfort, I guess.
Oh yeah, so you just
Yeah,
strut out naked. Is it because yeah, for you guys that don't know, first is likes to go exercise in gym. So you
yeah,
like to show off the body a bit.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then like sometimes you have a day where you like walk out, you dance, you run across the
Mhm.
hallway. I mean, I don't have a hallway, but I mean across different rooms. Yeah, I mean I can do that now. So
So
with
that's something
with
that's very important to you, being
yeah,
able
like that.
to
That's a
walk around naked.
yeah, and true.
Right.
And I like to like pace myself when I'm thinking, like even about all our content and stuff, or like work. I pace myself around the house. I
So
can't. I
did you hate it when we went to uni games? So we had to stay
uh
together.
yeah.
You were like, "Fuck this guy."
Yeah, every room was full. Like someone was
Yeah,
studying, someone was watching
yeah,
fucking TV. Upstairs also had something else. Yeah.
yeah. I remember that.
Uh, but still, like uni games, I think I like that memory. I think like for people who don't know, uni games is in Australia where different university compete with each other. And Joshua and I we did fencing back then, and then I still do it. But and we had a competition in Perth, and then we just kind of hung out and comparing to other athletes from different sports. Like most of them, when they competed, they would just at night they would just go out party, but not the fencers. No good. So we just stayed at home watching think dating show from China. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it
I
was
saw it
weird
on stream.
because there's a bunch of like it's us like Asians, and then it's like a bunch of white guys cheering for
Yeah,
this Chinese bachelors and bachelorettes, and then watched Rick and Morty, which just came out back then. It was
yeah,
interesting. It's a bunch of nerds and geeks.
yeah.
Uh, Good times. Anyway, moving on. Now we're gonna go into our deep dive, although deep dive in a way that will make it quick and understandable. We'll discuss on the Sudan situation, but not just Sudan, right? We also want to make it relevant to you. So we also would discuss like factors that lead to democratic, successful democratic transition. I mean, obviously, this the prominent successful cases would probably be Japan, South Korea. I think South Korea is more prominent because Japan's like monarchy to democracy, rather than having like a period of like communism or whatever, right? Anyway, we'll go into the Sudan situation. So over the last, I think, almost a month now, so there's like a civil war emerged in Sudan, and this is because of two generals fighting among each other. Um, right now, we don't know who's winning, who's losing, but essentially, the Western diplomats and people trying to leave the countries. I mean, already left the country, and the citizens are also leaving to nearby countries, which are also war torn. But some are leaving to Saudi Arabia, and then we'll go into some of the reasoning really quickly. So right now, there's two generals. I apologize, I mispronounced the name. General Abdel Fattah Burhan. So he's like a de facto leader, and then the other guy is General Muhammad Hamdan Dagalo, who's like a head of the militia. So they like competing with each other, and this came because of the years of tension. So they really didn't really like each other for years. It just kind of erupted now, kind of like House of Dragons, if anyone's seen that. And the situation about Sudan is quite interesting in a way that let me trace back. The country has a dictatorship. I think for 20 years until 2019, where they had a coup, another coup, um, and then during that coup in 2019, after the coup, right, there was an effort to go into democracy through civil and military share of power. So essentially, they create like a council that had military people and also had civil people, and they were planning to transition to democracy. I think in 2023, if I remember correctly. And at the time, during 2019 to roughly 2021, they actually had an economist who's actually the prime minister, and obviously that didn't really work out so well because In 2021 there was another coup that kind of led to the event that we had now. And one of the reasons that it failed was because the military and civil council that shared the power, it had more military people. So these military people, I suppose, just kept blocking the civilian shit, the civilian side. So it didn't really kind of transition well. And that's how the situation is ongoing right now. Obviously, with the coup, right? The US since 2021, I think US froze 700 million in direct assistance, which is shitload of money. When I was researching, like, wow, close to $1 billion.
I mean,
And
but you gotta
then
realize that's supporting the whole country.
yeah, that's a point. And then it suspended like debt relief, World Bank and the IMF also froze. I didn't know the amount, and then we saw like I double checked. It's 6 billion in immediate assistance and plans to like forgive 50 billion of debt. So all of that was gone. Yeah, it was like wow, it's such a lot of number. Yeah, but
Yeah.
anyway, um, any thoughts about the Sudan situation before we go to the democratic factors?
No, I just find it interesting because if I remember correctly, the two generals used to be
Hmm.
allies, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
one of them
correct.
used to be a deputy for the other.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
just shows you can't trust.
yeah. I can't
You
trust
couldn't.
anyone.
Yeah.
It,
He's number two. He gave him a bit of power, and now the guys come to fight him.
yeah, like fuck you, right? Because it's just, yeah, and that's the thing, like both generals have their own guys.
Yeah.
So the Burhan, he has his own military, and the other guy is like a militia. And you may be wondering why the fuck do they have militia or paramilitary? It's because sometimes the actual army doesn't have enough manpower, so you outsource it to the local militia, and local militia is how do I say this properly? It's like an illegal army, but not illegal per se. Like they semi-legal. Like they're recognized as an they're not legally like recognized as a full army compared to like normal army, right? But then they have certain authority and they do a
Mhm.
lot and then essentially outsource military, kind of like auxiliary police in Singapore. But
If I
yeah,
remember correctly, the paramilitary you're speaking of, they used to be a terrorist group, which the general, which the deputy converted over to become
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
terrorist.
exactly. It's just like this like when you think about like these parliamentary people, like at its core, operationally wise, they're just trying to rise up, like because there's not a lot of career paths you could go in Sudan. It's still like mining, agriculture, and all of that. So military is also a pathway to go. And
Yeah.
becoming a paramilitary is just better than being like a rogue vigilante robbing on the street. So that's why the military, like there's a group of paramilitary in Sudan and a lot of other countries in Africa even. And now we're gonna close off the I guess discussion with the successful factors needed in order to secure democracy, I suppose. This came from a really good source, which is from FP, which is foreignpolicy.com. What it does is that the website does, once again, we're not sponsored, but if you'd like to sponsor, let us know. It's goes into like different foreign policies, looking into different social issues from like a very macro level, and it analyzes different countries. I think it analyzes about 8 countries: Brazil, Indonesia, I think Thailand, Mexico, a few other countries, and look into their successful factors that lead to democracy. Obviously, these countries do not have perfect democracy, but still, there's a lot of interesting factors that I think we can discuss. So first example is that that I found really interesting is that it says that economic crisis can actually lead to shocks that can crack the dictatorship regime. In the past, like many scholars really believe like all economic progress automatically led to democracy, but that's not necessarily the case. Like we see China, we see Vietnam don't really have full democracy,
Yeah.
and they're doing pretty well at certain point. Right, China like during the early 2000 before 2010 12, economy is growing like crazy. Yeah, same with Vietnam now. Yeah, so they say that economic it's actually not the economic growth that leads to democracy. It's actually economic crises that can lead to like economic shocks that kind of shatter the authoritarian regime. Kind of like bad shit happens so much that people want things to change, and that's essentially the core
So
idea of
basically, that they're willing to risk their lives.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Shit gets so bad that you're like, what the fuck is happening? Like this
Yeah.
military regime's not doing anything. Uh, so you can see successful cases from like Indonesia. I think during the global financial crisis, where it led to like economic reforms. In Brazil, it was during the 1980s, kind of paved way from military government to democracy. Mexico was like 1982 debt crisis, and obviously, with the complications of the world, this does not always work, right? You have the case of Iran and North Korea. It doesn't matter how tough things get, there's still dictatorship, right? So it doesn't
Mm.
always work. Yeah, just it's funny because the article goes into details like, oh, it shouldn't be like engineering economic crises just to destabilize authoritarian regimes because it doesn't always work. Yeah. What do you think of this factor? Like,
Which one specifically are you referring to?
the economic crisis leads to like a crack in the regime.
No, I think there's some truth there because I
Mm.
think the cracks only occur when people are like, screw this. I'd rather die. I'm willing to
Mm.
die to cause
Yeah,
change,
yeah, yeah,
which
exactly.
requires a real bad situation.
Yeah,
But
things
also,
have to get.
you gotta realize, like, in these sort of countries, a lot of times when these protests start happening, there's a powerful foreign power helping them. I
Mm.
suspect. I suspect.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's yeah, even South Korea, Japan, like the U.S. is was kind of lurking there, right?
Yeah.
So, but obviously the U.S. Funny enough, the U.S. failed with Sudan, and I'll link it to the second or third factor. Let me check.
Mm.
Let me see. Yeah, like a third, second and third factor. I'll link it to the U.S. on that cases. So a few other factors is that um they say that an election, even a bad one, a one that's like, oh, there's a lot of cheating or sham elections, even those can still lead to greater success in transition into democracy, substantive. That's what they
Mm.
say, like democracy, because they say that okay, it kind of leads people to become familiar with the democratic process, even though it doesn't really succeed in the beginning. They use Mexico as an example, where there was an issue in like roughly I think 1976, um, and then the government that just revised the election laws to make it easier for the opposition to gain a few seats because I think there was a problem there. And then after that, like years after, I think during the economic crisis in 1980s, which kind of linked to the first factor, right? When the economic crisis hit, the opposition was able to rally civil society organization in a push to more transparent elections. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that it like even though there's like a few opposition party members now, and it doesn't really they're not really making meaningful changes, but in the future they can actually lead to meaningful changes in years to come. It's like
Mm.
like linked to the first part, like there's like a crack, an opening in the regime that leads to better changes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the second factor. Yeah.
And
And
side
mhm,
point, I,
mhm,
I, I think I bet you, the only reason these regimes agree to these sham elections
mhm.
is there's foreign aid tied to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they're like, I'll get a few $1 billion extra a
Mm,
month. Okay.
wholesome election, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, it all elections you will probably get a few good people in there, and that's kind of how it got started. Like, but obviously, this takes generations, could be. And now the third factor is that they say that oh, even when you be wary of armed insurgencies, but always support like non-violent mass mobilizations, which would now link to the Sudan case. So they say that like some countries may have violent protests in the beginning, emotions are high, but then if it's improved, it can actually lead to citizens become more engaging in the democratic process. It can also lead to strong civil engagement, like citizens becoming more of an owner of the democratic process, which is actually the whole point of democracy, right? Where people are theoretically in charge of the country. And then they also link that the successful ones are ones that, like the civil mobilization, right? It works better if they come from grassroots groups of people rather than the elites. And now I'm gonna link it to the what's it called, Sudan situation, because for the Sudan situation is that the U.S. didn't really follow this angle, this factor, right? One of the reasons that it failed, because the U.S. was also partnering up with these two generals that were fighting right now, rather than partnering up with the civil government or civil authority or with the people themselves. They chose to partner with the elites, the generals, and that kind of leads to it didn't really lead to meaningful changes. So it actually kind of failed.
I mean, that's also they
Mhm.
believe the generals. The generals are saying we
Mm.
want democracy. We came in. We decided to conquer this
Yeah.
land for democracy.
It just it's just weird, right? Because they
Yeah.
by now they should have had like extensive experiences. This is not like their first term. They're,
Maybe they just
encouraging.
choose to believe, or what I actually believe is the US probably got some great deals.
Mm.
you know,
Mm.
like I don't buy this whole. Whenever the US wants to bring democracy to a country, it's
Mm.
almost always they support a guy who is willing to give them very favorable
Yeah.
trade agreements. And
Yeah.
that's like you just all you have to do is just say you want democracy, just give us good trade agreements, and we will support it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like
And
that.
the U.S. was actually trying to do like a ceasefire a few times already with these two generals, but then the ceasefire like failed. Like someone just started shooting guns somewhere, so it didn't really hold. Obviously now there's still ceasefire ongoing. Like depending on negotiation, it stops, but it comes back up again and all of that. Anyway, I think we have a few more factors, but essentially it comes down to, I'll summarize that, it comes down to explain or expanding on the rule of law and expanding on the spread out of power, so less decentralized power, which is easier said than done, because once again it like with the case of Sudan, right? It's the council had more military people than the civilians, which kind of led them being voted out. Their voices weren't really heard. So that kind of leads to like the elites, I suppose, taking control rather than the people.
And plus, with the
Mhm.
current situation, the way it turned out, I doubt
Mm.
either general is going to be interested in decentralizing the power because
Yeah,
one guy was the number two guy of the other
yeah,
guy.
yeah.
So
Yeah, it's just,
who would you give power to? Obviously, the guy you trust the most, your number two.
yeah, exactly.
That guy ended up betraying you. So like, eh.
Yeah, exactly. I get the idea that, like, if you think of it, like when two generals fight, it's one of them will either win or becomes a stalemate. If one wins, then it just becomes another dictatorship for a while until foreign countries like the US kind of comes in and try to do like a guideline into a transition into democratic.
They'll be like, "Hey, you need our money, right?"
Yeah, exactly. And then they're trying to guide towards that. It would take years. Like with Myanmar, like didn't work.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Do you know why it didn't work? I'm very curious. I remember
Um.
Aung San Suu Kyi was pushed as this savior, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then they had a coup in 2021 and 22. I think 2021, and the military accused her of cheating on the elections. I think stealing money, fraud, all of those usual stuff. And like we don't know for sure, but it could also be that they're losing out on certain incomes, a certain power. It's always a delicate balance, because how do you make sure that the dictators or the military don't
Yeah.
don't get involved? Like how, because how, like legally, how do you destabilize and depower them, but then while still making sure that they're actually not going to rise up? Like, do you give them money to retire? I just can't
Yeah,
wrap
the
my head
problem is
around it.
it's not
Yeah.
just money; it's safety as
Mm.
well. So
Yeah.
I don't know how you can do that.
Mm.
Like I can't see any of these people being willing to, because
Yeah,
they've messed up, fucked over so many people.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
like they need protection as well, and I don't know how they will do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a great point. The Cambodia, the Hun Sen son, right? Even though he had degree in economics, his entire career is all in military, Cambodian military. Just didn't use that economics degree because I think it also comes down to like, oh, we want, like, he probably wanted this guy to have some sort of his own military crew, or like getting popular among the military as well, which is the core, the power of the country. So rather than having like a professional career, right? Because with the Sudan case, the prime minister, after the coup in 2019, which everyone thought it was going to transition into democracy, the guy who was a prime minister was an economist, but he didn't really last long. It's like 2 years because I suppose he didn't have like real power enough to hold against the military, two military generals. Hmm. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's it for our discussion on Sudan. Hopefully, folks, you learn more about what's going on there really quickly, and I think some of the democratic factors that lead to a successful democracy, I suppose. Even though South Korea and Japan actually are quite, like, have strong democracy, a lot of people actually start like saying, "Oh, it's not so good." I think we had a discussion about democracy, like, one of our first podcasts. Yeah, and yeah. Anyway, next week we'll be coming back again for another edition of our news summary and our deep dive discussion. But before we go, please subscribe, follow our Twitch, but more importantly, we have our Substack, which is like a newsletter. So if you subscribe that, you'll get 3 to 5 times a week of major news in Southeast Asia and the world. So the whole point is that we go through all the news for you, and then we'll summarize them in a easily understanding manner, and we give enough context so you're like, oh, Australia's buying submarine. What the fuck is that? What's the point? Most articles don't really go into the nuance, the implications, but we do, and we hope that, like, oh, once you read all those newsletter, if you want to deep dive, you can listen to our podcast or video like this. And
And the
then if you
problem
want,
is, if they do give the context, it's really long
yeah,
as well.
exactly. Yeah, so we try to make things short on our news summary, on our newsletter. And yeah, feel free to click on our Twitch profile. We have a Substack link there. And if you like us even more, do a pledge on that Substack to show us support even more. But for now, that's it for today. Next week we'll be here again on Saturday. Time is roughly in the late afternoon to evening. Time varies. We'll make an announcement on Twitch. You can always see the schedule on Twitch on what time we're gonna do it on each week. But for now, thank you and have a good weekend. Bye bye.
Well,